She thought he was just another cowboy passing through, until he bought the whole valley in her name. "Wake up. If you die here, I'll be stuck explaining to the sheriff why some half-dead cowboy dropped into my land." "You, yelling at me because I almost died? Or because I made your day a little too exciting?" The man's voice was hoarse but alive. Hannah Blake crouched beside him, brushing dust from his brow with the back of her glove. Her breath visible in the cool mountain air. Smoke still lingered in the trees behind her, thin wisps curling above scorched dirt and split stones where the explosion had gone off less than 15 minutes ago. The ridge above her eastern pasture had shaken like thunder from nowhere, and she'd run toward it before her better judgment could object. She had not expected to find a man. He lay half buried in debris, clothes torn and blood pooling slowly beneath his right arm. His hat, battered and singed at the rim, had rolled a few feet away, as if placed there gently by fate itself. His face was sun-darkened, his jaw lined with a day's worth of stubble, and a fresh cut bled down one side of his forehead. He looked like a cowboy from another century, until he spoke again. Did I trample something important?" he murmured. "Just your pride. Now shut up and stay conscious." Hannah looked around quickly. No vehicle, no gear, no signs of anyone else. Whatever had happened, he was alone. She sighed. Cowboys were trouble, even when they were half dead and possibly handsome under all that dirt. "Can you move?" she asked. He grunted. "Define move." "Okay, that's something." She crouched lower, got her arms under his, and with a grunt of her own, dragged him up into a half-standing slump. He was taller than he looked, heavier than she expected, and very much not helping. "You're not good at being rescued," she muttered, guiding him toward the tree line where her pickup was parked. "Not much practice," he said. "Most folks would have let me rot. Maybe they knew something I don't," she shot back. He gave a faint chuckle, then winced, clutching his side. The drive back to her ranch was short, but she watched him closely the entire way. He didn't pass out, which she took as a small victory. When she pulled up in front of the barn, he turned his head slowly to take in the red paint peeling from the walls, the crooked weather vane, the horses grazing just beyond the fence. "Nice place," he whispered. "Don't get too comfortable. You're not staying." Inside, she set him up on the worn couch in her office and started cleaning his wounds. He barely flinched as she dabbed antiseptic over the gash on his forehead. "What's your name?" she asked. He blinked at her. "Cole. Just Cole. Last name?" He shrugged, then grimaced. "Let's stick with first names today." She rolled her eyes. "Figures. Mysterious cowboy, alone in the woods, no ID, shows up after an explosion. I should have left you for the coyotes." "But you didn't." "No," she said, quieter now. "I didn't." There was something in his eyes, something that wasn't fear or arrogance. It was tired. Not physically, but deep, bone-tired, like a man who had been running from something for a long time and wasn't sure if he'd stopped yet. She stood up, wiping her hands on a towel. "You can stay tonight, but tomorrow you're gone. I've got enough problems without adding you to the list." "That's fair," he murmured. "Thanks for not leaving me behind." She hesitated at the doorway, then glanced over her shoulder. "You looked like you'd already been left enough times." He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said more than any words ever could. By morning he was sitting up, bandaged and quiet, sipping coffee from a chipped enamel mug like he'd been doing it every day for years. "Cole Maddock," he said, when she finally asked. "Just here, until I can move without wincing." Hannah stood across the room, arms folded, leaning against the barn door frame. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes scanned him like a rancher sizing up a new horse, assessing, calculating, withholding judgment, but not giving it freely. He wasn't like the drifters who sometimes wandered through these hills looking for work or trouble. He was too grounded, too still. His silence wasn't empty, it was practiced. "Few days," she said finally. "No more." He nodded, the motion slight. "That's all I need." She didn't press further, but as she turned and walked out, her eyes never stopped watching. Over the next few days, Cole moved slowly at first, favoring his right side, but with a quiet stubbornness that made Hannah grudgingly respect him. He didn't loaf around or expect help. He swept the barn floor before she asked, repaired a broken hinge on the main gate with tools from the dusty shed she hadn't used in months, rewired the power box in the tack room, and somehow got the old overhead lights humming again like they hadn't in years. She didn't thank him, not in words, but she started leaving the kettle full in the morning, set out clean towels in the loft room above the stable. Once she left an extra sandwich on the kitchen table, then pretended not to notice when it was gone. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words were careful and quiet, chosen like a man who understood the weight of what he said. Not the loud kind of man, but the type who'd watched too much and said too little for too long. "You've got erosion forming near the lower paddock," he said one morning, kneeling beside the trough. "The runoff from the east slopes cutting into your topsoil. A retaining barrier would help." She narrowed her eyes. "You know a lot for a guy who says he's just passing through." He didn't flinch. Been on a lot of land. Too much land, she thought, and probably not his own. The ranch had seen many men. Repairmen, buyers, debt collectors. Cole wasn't any of those, but he didn't exactly fit in either. He moved with a purpose, but not one she could name. One afternoon, she found him kneeling beside Dusty, her oldest mare, brushing out the tangles in the horse's thick mane. Dusty didn't let just anyone near her. She was moody, protective, and old enough to remember better days. But there she stood, calm and quiet, her eyes half-lidded as Cole ran the brush through her coat like he'd known her forever. "You used to work with horses?" Hannah asked, arms crossed, watching from the barn entrance. He didn't look up. "Not really," he said, "but I spent time around people who should have treated them better." Something about the way he said it made her pause, like every word had a shadow behind it. That night, long after he'd gone to sleep in the loft and the ranch had gone quiet, she sat at the old desktop in her father's study and typed his name into the search bar. Nothing jumped out at first, just a few scattered references. One, older than the others, caught her eye. A regional report mentioning a Cole Maddox, listed as a consultant for Marwood Holdings, a land acquisition firm, infamous across the West. They bought up failing ranch towns, flipped them into resorts, and left locals with nothing but broken fences and court dates. The article described him as a deal maker with a silver tongue and an iron will. Her stomach twisted. Marwood, her family's land, had once been in their crosshairs. Her father had spent years fighting off offers, threats, lies. They had nearly lost everything. And now one of them, a man who'd worn that suit, signed those papers, was sleeping 20 yards from her front door. The next morning, she found him near the stables, adjusting a loosened post by the corral. She didn't waste time. "So, what do you do, really?" she asked, voice sharp. He looked up, then slowly stood, brushing dust from his palms. "I used to work in land negotiations," he said. "Corporate deals, resorts, infrastructure, whatever made money." She scoffed. "Let me guess, you came to look at the valley, run numbers, pass it off to the next buyer?" "No," he said quietly. "I left that life a long time ago." "People like you don't change." He looked her dead in the eyes. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they see what they've done and get tired of watching good land go to the wrong hands. She stared at him, her face hard but her heart already shifting. She didn't say a word, and she didn't tell him to leave. For Cole, that silence was more mercy than he deserved. The black SUV kicked up a storm of dust as it pulled up the gravel road, stopping with military precision outside the barn. Hannah was hauling feed when she heard the crunch of boots on dry dirt, followed by a voice that made her heart both stiffen and ache. "Still stacking your own bags, Hannah? I thought by now you'd have someone doing the heavy lifting for you." She turned, and there he stood, Brigadier General Richard Blake, retired but still steel in posture and voice. The man who had raised her after her parents died young. The man who'd taught her how to shoot, ride, stand tall, and never let emotions dictate decisions. The man she hadn't seen in 4 years. Nice to see you too, she said, brushing straw from her hands. He nodded once, then scanned the property like he was assessing a battlefield. It hasn't changed much. It wasn't supposed to. He looked past her toward the stable, where Cole was saddling one of the horses. His eyes narrowed. Who's that? Guest, she replied. Recovered from a fall near the East Ridge. Helping out while he heals. Richard's jaw tightened. You're letting strange men sleep under your roof? Hannah's face hardened. He's not a stranger anymore. That's not the point. No, I think it is. They stood in silence. The wind carried the scent of hay and old wood. Richard stepped forward, lowering his voice. I came because it's time you stopped doing this alone. There are investors moving into the valley, friends of mine, people who can protect this land, preserve your future. She folded her arms. Let me guess, one of those people happens to have a son you'd like me to marry. Logan is a good man, educated, successful. He could make this place thrive, turn it into more than just a memory farm. It's not for sale, she said flatly. Not the land, Hannah. You. She went still. Excuse me? I mean your time, your future. This life, working sun up to sundown alone out here like some frontier widow. It's not sustainable. You need someone solid beside you. She stared at him for a long moment, then said, voice cold, You want me to marry Logan because it makes you feel like you've completed your mission, secured the legacy. Not because it's what I want. It's what your parents would have wanted. You didn't know my parents, she snapped. They died when I was 5. You raised me to be strong, not submissive. I'm not a pawn in some political marriage. He looked toward Cole again, who was now walking toward the fence with a bucket of oats. So instead you're entertaining cowboys with no past and no purpose? Cole is not your concern. Richard's voice sharpened. He is if people start talking. You know how it looks, Hannah. You, alone with some drifter. It puts your name and mine under a light I don't care to explain. Her voice was quiet, but unshakable. Then don't. I don't need your approval. I never did. He stepped back, surprised by the edge in her voice. You raised me to defend what I believe in, she said. Well, I believe in this ranch, in the land, in making my own choices. If that costs your pride, then maybe pride was never worth keeping. Richard's jaw worked for a moment, but he said nothing, just turned and walked back to his SUV. Before he climbed in, he said without looking at her, Don't say I didn't warn you. She didn't answer. But as the engine roared away and the dust rose behind it, she felt something deep inside her settle. She had chosen her own side. And she wasn't alone. The afternoon sun was soft on the hills, casting long shadows across the barnyard as Hannah adjusted a saddle in the tack room. Outside, the low murmur of conversation drifted in, voices she didn't recognize. Curious, she stepped out, wiping her hands on her jeans. Will, her stable hand, stood near the fence, talking with an older rancher from across the ridge. They paused when they saw her. The man squinted, leaning on the top rail. That fellow staying here tall, quiet, knows his way around a fence post? Hannah nodded cautiously. Cole, why? The rancher shook his head slowly. Didn't expect to see him in a place like this. You don't know who he is? Hannah frowned. He said he used to work in land management. The rancher gave a humorless laugh. That's one way to say it. Folks used to call him the silent sweeper, moved through valleys like a ghost. Friendly handshake one day, bulldozers the next. Whole community's gone. He worked for Marwood Holdings. Ruthless outfit. If he's here, I'd double-check your fence lines. Her stomach dropped. The man tipped his hat and walked off, but the words clung to her like burrs. Silent sweeper. Community's gone. That evening, she found Cole in the barn, brushing down Dusty. The air between them shifted the moment she stepped in. Who are you really? She asked, her voice like steel. He looked up, brush still in hand, and something in his eyes said he already knew this moment would come. I told you, my name's Cole Maddox. No, she snapped. Not the name, the truth. Were you really the man who helped bury entire towns for profit? He slowly set down the brush. Yes. The word landed like a stone between them. She stared, jaw clenched. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't come here to talk about the man I used to be. You should have, before I let you near my land, my animals, my life. He met her eyes. I never lied to you. Lying by omission is still lying, Cole, she said, voice cracking. You think you can fix what you did by hiding in my barn, doing chores, playing the wounded cowboy? No, he said quietly. She stepped back, fists clenched. Then why are you here? He exhaled. The silence was long, aching. There was a woman, he said. Small town in Wyoming, lived alone on a stretch of land our company wanted. She fought the deal. Came to every meeting with handwritten notes and a thermos of coffee. She reminded me of someone. I don't know, maybe my mother. I sat across from her for months, wearing a suit, telling her we'd preserve the charm of the area. I didn't believe a word of it. He paused. She had a stroke. 2 days after she signed the final agreement, her nephew called to say she died before she could pack. His voice broke. That was the last deal I ever made. Hannah said nothing. She wanted to scream, to shake him, to ask why he waited so long to tell her, but all she managed was a single bitter line. You think a few days of mucking stalls and fixing fences makes up for that? No. Her eyes burned. He took a step toward the open barn door, then turned back. I didn't come to take anything from you, Hannah. Yes, he said softly. I came because I don't want to take anything anymore. Then he walked out, leaving behind silence and the echo of a man trying to become someone better. The papers lay untouched on the kitchen table, thick with legal ink and emotional weight. Hannah stared at them, arms crossed, back stiff as her foster father's voice echoed in the small wooden kitchen that once belonged to her mother. This isn't punishment, Richard said firmly, standing tall in his perfectly pressed jacket. It's protection, a path forward. By selling my name to a man I barely know? She shot back. Logan is respectable, successful. His family's invested heavily in the region. A marriage between you two secures the valley, ends all this struggle. It ends me, she said quietly. Richard's jaw twitched, but he didn't speak. They'll clear your debt, he added. You'll keep the ranch, the horses, your name, but it won't mean a thing if you're sleeping with a broken heart every night. Then I'll sleep alone, she said, her voice stronger now. But I'll sleep as myself. He stepped back, disappointment a shadow behind his stern eyes. Then you're on your own, he said. I've kept this ranch afloat longer than you know, but not another cent. You want freedom, then pay the price for it. And he left, the screen door slamming behind him like the end of a war. The next morning, the sky was dark with low clouds, and Hannah walked slowly into the barn, dragging her boots. She stopped at the stall where Sable, her oldest therapy mare, nuzzled her palm gently. I'm sorry, she whispered. By noon, the hauler came, 2 men and a trailer from a therapeutic riding center 3 counties away. It was a good place, she had made sure of that. But watching the horses load one by one felt like peeling parts of herself off and boxing them for someone else to claim. Sable was the last to go. When the trailer rolled out of sight, the rain began. She stood in the empty barn, arms folded tightly, chest hollow, the soft patter of rain barely masking the sound of something breaking inside her. That night, she stayed out in the barn. No lights, just her, the creaking wood, and the storm's lullaby. She sat on an overturned feed bucket, staring at the empty stalls. Then, the door creaked open. She didn't turn around, but she knew the footsteps, the rhythm of boots she had memorized in silence. Cole stepped in, soaked to the skin. He said nothing, just carried a tarp under one arm and started folding empty saddle blankets near the tack wall. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Then finally, softly, "I heard you sold the herd." She wiped her cheek, but no tears showed. Wasn't enough to keep everything, but enough to buy time. He nodded. His hands didn't stop moving. His eyes avoided hers. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness," he said after a long pause. "I came because I didn't want you to face this alone." "You already left once," she said, voice cracking. "What makes you think showing up in the rain fixes anything?" "It doesn't." "Then why are you here?" He finally looked at her, and in that moment, his face was no longer the guarded cowboy she had saved. It was a man, stripped of pride, stripped of pretense, standing in front of a woman he admired more than he knew how to say. "Because this isn't about fixing," he said. "It's about standing beside you even when I can't fix it." She stared at him, too tired to be angry, too hurt to send him away. He picked up another empty feed bucket, set it beside hers, and sat. No more words, just two people sitting in a barn, in the rain, surrounded by absence and memory. But for the first time in days, Hannah didn't feel entirely alone. The letter arrived in a plain manila envelope, unmarked except for the state notary's seal pressed deep into the flap. No return address, no warning. Hannah found it tucked between a feed catalog and a final notice from the electric company. She brought it inside, not thinking much of it at first, and set it on the worn kitchen table next to her half-empty mug of cold coffee. The morning light slanted in through the dusty window panes, catching on the steam that no longer rose from her cup. She stared at the envelope for a long moment before opening it. Something in her gut twisting quietly. When she finally broke the seal and unfolded the contents, her hands trembled. It wasn't a bill, not a threat, not a foreclosure notice. It was a packet of legal documents, stamped, sealed, real. She flipped to the final page, and there it was, a single line, centered, clear. Hannah Blake, sole legal owner of the South Valley Range. Her name, her land. Her breath caught, a sharp inhale that didn't release. The kitchen seemed to go still around her. Even the ticking clock above the stove fell silent. She read it again, then a third time. The land she had fought to keep, defended from developers, lied awake nights worrying about, was now legally hers. No more threats, no more bargaining, no more fear. She flipped through the rest of the papers, scanning for clues. A private fund, anonymous donor. The title had been transferred through a third-party trust based in Wyoming, shielding the true source of the purchase. Every loophole closed, every box checked. Her chest tightened, breath coming short and shallow. This wasn't a gift, it was a message. She pushed back from the table, heart pounding in her ears, and stormed out the back door. She didn't bother with her coat. Gravel crunched beneath her boots as she moved fast across the yard, her eyes already searching the horizon, and there he was. Cole stood by the north fence, one hand resting on the weathered post, the other holding a folded piece of paper, faded and yellowed, the edges curled with time. The wind caught the hem of his coat, the same one he wore the day she dragged him out of the smoke and dirt. She marched toward him, jaw tight, fists clenched around the legal packet. "Was it you?" He didn't move, didn't flinch, just looked at her with those steady, unreadable eyes. "You already know the answer." She held out the papers, her voice shaking. This is everything. Do you even understand what you did?" He nodded, slow and solemn. "I do." "Why?" she asked, barely a whisper. He looked down at the paper in his hand, a map, hand-drawn, faded pencil lines marking old fence lines and creeks, with her father's initials scrawled in one corner. "You showed me this map once," he said. "Told me how every inch was fought for, fenced by hand, held together with grit and love. I've bought and sold land my whole life, Hannah, for people who never stepped foot on it. I sold forests I never walked, hills I never breathed on. I thought it was just business." He paused, the wind lifting his hair. "But when I came here, when I saw you, what this land meant to you, I realized I hadn't just taken land from people all those years. I'd taken pieces of their soul, and maybe mine too." Her throat tightened. "This wasn't your burden to fix," she said, her voice thick. "You didn't owe me anything." "No," he said, "but I owed myself something, a chance to do one thing right." She took a step closer, searching his face. "You gave up everything, didn't you?" "I gave up what never really belonged to me." She looked back at the papers in her hands. "You could have left, disappeared, no one would have known." He smiled faintly. "I almost did. But the wind never stays, Hannah. And I needed to." The silence between them stretched, full, heavy, sacred. The wind carried the faint scent of cedar and the first drops of rain. She reached out and gently took the map from his fingers. Her voice was soft, but certain. "You didn't just give me land, Cole. You gave me back my voice." He met her eyes, and in that moment she didn't see the man who'd once taken land for a living. She saw the man who had fought to become more than what the world had made him. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the western ridge, casting long, golden shadows that stretched across the valley like fingers from the past, reaching into the present. The air was rich with the scent of warm grass and fading wildflowers, the hum of insects soft under the hush of early evening. Cole walked a few steps ahead of Hannah, guiding her up the winding trail that curved along the edge of the property. The path had grown narrower since she'd last climbed it, overgrown with brush and thyme. Her boots crunched softly against the dirt, and every now and then she'd glance up at him, his steady gait, his shoulders a little more relaxed than before. The hill grew steeper as they climbed, but the ache in her legs was a familiar one. It wasn't just the incline or the distance. It was memory. This was the same place where she had found him a year ago, broken, bruised, and half buried in dust and pine smoke. Back then she had dragged him to safety on sheer instinct, suspicion biting at every thought. Now she followed him willingly, something entirely different blooming quietly in her chest. They reached the crest in silence. The wind moved gently through the tall grass, brushing against her jeans like a whisper. The sky was painted in hues of lavender and deep flame, streaks of light falling over the valley like brushstrokes on a masterpiece no one could recreate. From where they stood, the land unfolded below them. Rolling hills, fences stretching like veins, her barn a tiny red square in the distance. Her land, their land now, even if he would never say it. Cole stopped at the edge and turned to face her. His eyes were softer than she'd ever seen them, steady, open, unguarded. "This is where it all started," he said, his voice low, "and where I finally stopped running." Hannah looked out over the hills, her heart both full and aching. "I still don't understand why you did all of it. Why me?" Cole reached into his coat and pulled out a thick, slightly worn folder. He held it out to her with both hands. "Every deed, every contract, every transfer," he said. "It's all here. No secrets, no loopholes, no one pulling strings behind the curtain. It's yours." She took it slowly, her fingers brushing his as she did. The folder was heavier than it looked, heavy with meaning, with sacrifice. "And this," he added, pulling something small and wooden from his pocket, "is not paperwork." He opened the box and held it out. Inside was a ring. Simple, silver, no diamond, no polish, no flair. Just a plain band, beautiful in its honesty. Along the inside edge, engraved in clean, purposeful letters, were the words, "You changed the man, the Tawayland." Her breath caught. Her fingers trembled as they curled around the box, then the folder, then finally her own chest, trying to contain the tide rising too fast, too full. Cole took a step closer, his voice steady but softer now. "I didn't buy this land to impress you, Hannah, or to repay you for what you did. I bought it because it changed me. This land and you made me want to build something instead of tearing things down." She stared at him, her eyes filling, her throat thick. "You don't have to say anything," he continued. "I know I'm not the man your father imagined you'd be with. Hell, I'm not even the man I thought I'd become. But I'm here, and I stayed, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I finally found someone worth staying for." Tears spilled down her cheeks, slow and silent. Not the bitter kind she had cried out of anger or loss. These were different. These were soft and sure, born of belief. She didn't speak, just nodded once, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his chest, burying her face in the crook of his neck. The folder slipped from her hand and fluttered gently to the grass. The box remained, clutched tightly in her palm. Cole's arms closed around her, warm and solid, as though he was anchoring her to this moment, to this place. Above them, the wind moved through the trees like a sigh of peace, rustling the leaves in a gentle hush, as if the land itself had been holding its breath, and now, finally, it could exhale. She didn't need to say a word. The way she leaned into him, the way she stayed, that said everything. And, in that stillness, under a sky lit by flame and forgiveness, neither of them was running anymore. 1 year later, the valley had bloomed in ways no one could have imagined. Where once the fields lay dry and uncertain, now paddocks stretched wide with sturdy fencing, young horses grazed under open skies, and laughter echoed from the barn every afternoon. They called it the Healing Ranch, a place where troubled teens came to learn responsibility, rebuild trust, and rediscover themselves through the steady rhythm of working with horses. Hannah stood by the old oak tree near the edge of the paddock, watching a group of boys brush down 2 mares, their hands unsure but determined. One of them looked up and waved, a grin breaking across his face like sunshine. She smiled, the kind of quiet, full smile that came from something earned. Behind her, Cole approached, his boots soft in the grass. He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind and rested his chin lightly on her shoulder. 16 kids enrolled, he said softly. 3 of them already asking about vet schools. She leaned back into him, heart warm. I still can't believe it. A year ago I was selling horses just to pay the electric bill. And now, he said, you're running a miracle. No, she whispered. We're running it, together. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun settle behind the western ridge. The land was still the same, windy and wild, but now it held something more. Roots, not just of trees, but of people. From behind them came the sounds of music and chatter as the harvest festival began. Locals had gathered to celebrate the year's work, the community's growth, and the strange, beautiful story of how a forgotten ranch and a scarred man found their way to each other. Under strings of warm lights and between tables stacked with pies and pumpkins, neighbors laughed, children ran, and the valley pulsed with life. As the sky deepened into gold and copper, Cole pulled Hannah gently aside, into the barn where the first words between them had been laced with suspicion and stubbornness. Now it smelled of hay and hope. He took her hands, his gaze steady, heart clear. I used to live to take land away from others, he said, voice low and certain. But with you, all I've ever wanted is to lay the foundation for a life worth staying for. Hannah's eyes shimmered, her fingers tightening around his. They didn't need a stage or vows or even a crowd. This barn, these walls, and the ground beneath their boots were holy enough. Outside, the wind shifted, rolling gently through the valley, as if blessing what they'd built, and hand in hand, Hannah and Cole stepped into the night, 2 people who once carried nothing but regret, now walking on land that finally felt like home. And so, from a violent explosion in a disputed valley to a quiet home built on love and redemption, Hannah and Cole proved that even the most broken pasts can give birth to a future worth fighting for. They didn't just save the land, they saved each other, not with grand gestures, but with daily choices, to stay, to heal, to believe again. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where we bring you unforgettable tales of love, resilience, and second chances. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story that stirs your soul.